Good evening, brothers and sisters. My name is Brooks Sunket. I'm from U.S. Labor Against the War. And I'm here this evening, much like you, because this illegal, unjust war needs to come to an end. It needs to come to an end immediately. This war has cost us many things, most of all the lives of our precious children. It has cost us the lives of Iraqi people, thousands and thousands. Can I have the first slide? We paid for this war in many ways. We paid for this war and lost jobs and services that billions of our money could have created. The funds that went to war were no longer available to meet our needs at home. Instead of serving the common good, as government should, the Bush administration, with the support of Congress, took our country to an illegal war. They did so over the objections of the world community. They did so in violation of international law and our treaty obligations. In 2007, the decision to go to war cost us $137 billion. Slide 2, please. In slide 2, you see a classroom. There are many things that we could have done with $137 billion in 2007. Hired 2 million music and art teachers, or paid scholarships to 22 million college students, or built 13,000 new elementary schools, or placed 18 million children in the Head Start program, or hired 2 million elementary school teachers. Slide, next slide, please. In this slide, you see shipping containers, windmills, doctors, nurses, and houses. With $130 billion, we could have hired 2 million port container inspectors. We could have hired 3 million public safety officers, or built 1 million affordable housing units, or provided health care for 39 million adults and children. Slide 4, please. This occupation also cost the American people $720 million a day, or $500,000 every minute of every day. According to the American Friends Service Committee, this figure is averaged daily, total for the real and present future costs of the war. So far, Congress has appropriated more than $560 billion for this war. When you add up all the real costs, including lifelong medical care for injured veterans, plus interest on the huge debt created by the war, placement of military equipment, and other future costs, the war and occupation have a price tag of over $1 trillion in the first 4 years. Next slide, please. In this slide, you see the devastation of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. So when Hurricane Katrina and Rita hit, emergency equipment and the forces to operate it were sitting in Iraq, unavailable for rescue and reconstruction in Louisiana, Mississippi. Funds needed to rebuild areas devastated by hurricanes were lining the pockets of Blackwater and corporations like Kellogg, Root, and Brown, and giant corporations like Halliburton. The war created 4 million Iraqi refugees. It also turned out hundreds and thousands of Americans into refugees in their own country. 3 years after the devastation of Katrina, most of the people displaced by Katrina are still living in trailers or with relatives all over the country. Next slide, please. In this slide, you see children. What has the war cost us? Health and well-being of our children. For the cost of $1 a day of occupation, we could provide 400 children with health care, or more than 1 million with free school lunches for a year. 46 million of us go without health care, and thousands of poor children are being pushed off the federally funded SHIFT program. Between years 2002 and 2006, dozens of federal programs were cut. Programs like Head Start, community food and nutrition programs, youth and job training, affordable housing, materials and child health care programs. 37 million of us were poor in 2005. Today, 37 million of us are poor. Next slide, please. In this slide, it's a photo of Walter Reed Hospital. The war has cost nearly 39,000 non-mortal U.S. military casualties. 25,000 returning vets have filed claims for long-term disability. 20,000 troops not classified as wounded during the combat in Iraq and Afghanistan have some form of mental illness. 1/4 of 100,000 personnel who served in Iraq and Afghanistan had some form of mental illness. Veterans in this country make up 1 in 4 homeless people in the United States, though they are only 11% of the general population. Constantly, veterans' benefits are always being proposed for cuts. The Army continually fights veterans who come back from the war when they file claims for disability. Next slide, please. In this slide, you see a comparison between the Vietnam War and Iraq and the devastation. It's not much different. There, I think, are many parallels. Both wars were illegal acts of preemptive aggression, unsanctioned by international law or world opinion. Both wars were launched by deception. In Iraq, there were the weapons of mass destruction, Saddam Hussein and bin Laden connection. In Vietnam was the fabricated Gulf of Tonkin incident and elections. Mandated by the Geneva Convention, election in Vietnam was canceled because the U.S. feared Ho Chi Minh would win the election. The government regularly lied in both wars. In both wars, we had prisoners that were abused. In Vietnam was My Lai. In Iraq was Abu Ghraib. Both wars talked about promoting democracy. Both wars claimed to be about a noble cause, international goals. In Iraq, we were fighting terrorists. In Vietnam, we were fighting communists. Both wars took us to countries with cultures we never understood and never tried to understand or spoke their language. In Vietnam, we called the enemy communists. In Iraq, we called them foreign terrorists. In Iraq, veterans and military personnel faced all types of weapons, depleted uranium. In Vietnam, it was Agent Orange. In Vietnam, they talked about the domino theory, that communists would take over all of Asia, that we had to go there to fight to stop that takeover. And in the Middle East, it talked about democracy in the Middle East and how we had to be there to stop dictatorship. Many veterans coming home were told that the communities, the peace communities, were their enemy. They were told that in Vietnam when we came back. They're being told that Iraq today in America. Other similarities. In Vietnam, we dropped more bombs in Indochina than had been dropped in the entire world up to that point. Their goal, they so-called said, was winning the hearts and minds. In Iraq, it was shock and awe. In Iraq, the U.S. refused to account for the civilian casualties, and many times said that they were part of the insurrection. In Vietnam, they did the same thing. They were the enemy. They were innocent civilians, but we considered them casualties of war. We kept track of the men that was injured and killed that were U.S. troops, but somehow not the innocent civilians that were killed. Somehow it seemed to suggest that American lives were more important than civilians in countries we were fighting in both Vietnam and Iraq. There was the Tet Offensive in Vietnam, where in one night they attacked every military installation in the country. In Iraq, 2004 insurrection in Iraq helped expose, and both offenses helped expose the lie that the war was going well. In both countries, they promised to rebuild and did not in either. Next slide, please. In this slide, you see a photo of Alan Greenspan and an oil well. And the reason being is that this war was fought basically about oil. U.S. government and international monetary funds are pressing the Iraqi government to adopt a new oil law that would open up Iraqi's oil industry to foreign investments and control. That law is being presented to ensure that oil revenues are equally shared by all of Iraq. But in fact, nothing could be further from the truth. The law will open up a huge portion of Iraq's massive oil reserves to bidding by foreign corporations. All undeveloped, undiscovered oil will be subject to bidding. Only 27 of 78 now known oil fields remain under control of Iraq. Recent estimates are Iraq has a second only to Saudi Arabia in potential oil in the entire world. Iraq's oil is among the cheapest in the world to extract at only $2 a barrel. This makes Iraq oil reserve the most valuable and profitable in the world, whoever controls it. The contracts contemplated would give the contract holder exclusive control of the oil for 30 years. At the time of our U.S. invasion of Iraq, the U.S. ordered its military to protect and defend oil wells, while admit wholesale looting of every other treasure of Iraq. In more than 40 articles, there's only one article of law that addresses equitable distribution of oil revenues. Next slide, please. In this slide, you see two Iraqi union leaders. Hashmia Mosa Hussein, president of Iraqi Electrical Utilities Union, and Abu Mushu, international representative of the General Federation of Iraqi Workers. Iraq unionism activism goes back to the 1920s, when the labor movement formed the working class based on the struggle against British authority. The Iraqi Trade Union Labor Organization was abolished in 1987. After 1987, Hussein made it illegal to have trade unions in Iraq. When U.S. invaded Iraq, it still became illegal to have trade unions there. As much as they talk about democracy, democracy is really not extended when they have the opportunity. I'm told I only got a few seconds left. I just want to make one other point, that even though labor unions are illegal in Iraq, people have risked their lives. They have been kidnapped, there have been bombings of their workplace, they have been shot, they have been targeted for assassinations, tortured, and yet they still maintain that they will have a union. Thank you very much.